So my name is Josh Brock. I'm the Director of CCA Client Services for Calpine Energy Solutions. Calpine is a Fortune 500 company. We're a top 5 energy service provider in the United States, a top 3 in California. I think many of you know us. We helped MCE launch in 2010, and since then we've helped 12 other CCAs launch and get service started since then. And we do the back office support, data, billing, and call center services. So I'd like to do a quick poll. Everyone, raise your hand. This is everyone raise your hand. I know. This is easier this way. Now, keep your hand up if you've ever gotten a bill in the mail and said, God, thank God that was accurate this time. For the like 3 of you, either you weren't listening or I'm not sure who your provider is. But to us, that's a really important lesson, right? Because that's the consumer expectation. At no point in your life have you probably thought, man, thank God Cox really got the bill right this time, because yesterday, not so good. So for us, we do that really well. We live up to that expectation, and we measure it in really deep detail. We have 99.9996 billing accuracy. That's pretty cool, but to all of you, for the 3 of you who raised your hand, you appreciate me. Thank you. For the rest of you, you're like, of course you did, that's your job. So we appreciate and understand that. And one of the things, so we do call center service as well. We're California-based, we're geo-redundant, we're union represented, and a lot of our call centers, and in fact, almost all of them, are in CCA service territory. They're your customers, and that's something we're very proud of. But for those of you who know me, you know that I sort of live by story, and story is how I think we often connect with each other. So I wanted to sort of say 2 things here before I introduce our next panel. One, it's been an amazing journey over the last 8 years being part of this community, and as you grow, we've been able to grow and innovate with you. And I also wanted to tell a story that many of you are familiar with, and this is not unique to us, but in 2011, the Southern California grid went down. SDG&E was cascading blackout, and it just sort of swept across Arizona into Southern California, parts of Baja California, parts of LA and Orange County. When that happens, you know, that's a 1 in 1,000 event. You know, for those of us in the climate resiliency space, it's a 1,000-year storm, it's a 1,000-year event, right? It's that 1 in 1,000 chance that that'll happen. But what happens is that you don't engineer for that. And so in our community, what that meant is that our pump stations, for example, we had combined water and sewer overflows, and the result of which is we had significant fines from the EPA. We had hospitals that run big diesel generators that couldn't get them to start up in time, and they weren't able to serve their community. We had schools that had to shut down. We had people who weren't able to work. We had economic loss and job loss. And one of the main themes of CCAs has been distributed energy resources and what they mean. And sometimes that's in the context of how can they lower your bill? How many cents per kilowatt hour cheaper is that? And I challenge you to say that, yes, that's an important thing to look at, because at the end of the day, it really is important for dollar and cents. It's important to have clean, affordable energy for your community. But it's also really important to have a grid that's resilient and to give you guys the resources to make sure that you're deploying something that is both economically feasible, but also makes your community that much more resilient, that protects against that 1 in 1,000 event. So I'm really happy to say that our organization, and I think many of the organizations that are in the CCA space, are making those investments. You know, in a short time, we'll be talking about, I think later on today, we'll be talking about a big data solution that puts your data at your fingertips, makes it accessible, makes it usable, makes it understandable. And that's important. And we're also rolling out new resources and tools to help with DER deployment, to make sure that you can develop and deploy defensible strategies that looks at the grid and takes a lot of other things into account so that you can make the best investment for your community, doing the right resources that serve not just the energy, but also the important community impacts that we know that you're trying to accomplish. As Jeff said, it's not just about the electrons that we deliver, right? But it's what we can do for our community. It's the mission that we're trying to serve. So let me just say, it's an honor to be on this mission with you guys. For the CCAs out there that have brought us on and we've been your partner, thank you. It's an honor to be part of your community. It's an honor to serve you. For those of you in this room, San Diego, let's do this, right? The opportunity's there. Thank you very much. And with that, I'd like to invite up our next panel and moderators. Jeff Byron is a former CEC commissioner, a longtime proponent of California's clean energy policies, and a current angel investor, and of course an advisor to the Center for Climate Protection for a number of years. Jeff will be moderating the session. With that, our panelist for this next session is the Honorable Autumn Burke, representing the 62nd District. We have David Hochschild, California Energy Commissioner, CEC Commissioner. Martha Guzman-Aceves, CPUC Commissioner, Mark Farron of the CAISO Board of Directors, and Don Weiss, the CEO of MCE Clean Energy. Please join me in welcoming them to the stage.
What would you like us to say?
So, Reggie, are we okay if we jumble, or do you want us in a particular order? The number we talked about?
What number are you?
So, I don't remember.
I'm 12.
Good, the ladies are in the middle. I like that. Welcome, everyone. My name is Jeff Byron, and it is 9:38. We've got a little shortened panel this morning. We're going to finish at 10:45. I'd like to thank my panelists very much for being here today. This is a great panel, and I'd like to welcome all of you here today. Let me ask a few quick questions. How many of you are new to this symposium, the Business for Local Energy Symposium? Raise your hands. Wow, lots of new folks. How many of you are associated with community choice aggregation in some way? Okay, and how many of you know who all these folks are that are up here? Okay, so not all of you are well known to everyone in the audience, but that's okay. That's okay. But I just want you to get a sense of who you're speaking with. Here's what we're going to do. I'm going to give some brief introductions of my panelists, maybe some things you don't know about them. I'll ask each of you to make just an introductory statement. Just introduce yourselves. It's really a mic check. Audience, there are cards at your tables, and the little white cards, we're doing questions by collection here. I'm going to try and save about 15 minutes at the end here to collect questions. And you need to just kind of put them up in the air, and there's gentlemen, I think one on each side of the room, raising their hands. They'll see you, okay? And come pick up your questions. We'll do as many of those as we can. Remember, it's tempting when we have dignitaries like this to ask questions that are off topic. Don't bother, okay? We're not going to go to those. And then we'll ask each of our panelists to give a final or closing statement. And to my panelists, you know, I've had the pleasure of doing this, moderate this panel for the last couple of years, and I just wanted to give you a sense of this audience. You have seen the little votes they did. It's grown in size each year for those of you who have not been here. But I wanted to tell you just a couple of things. This is an audience comprised primarily of people that serve their communities. They're public servants like many of you, and they're concerned about addressing climate change. And you can also assume they're pretty well informed. Okay. But most of all, they want to hear your perspectives today. If there's something you want to make sure you communicate, today's the day to do it. And if you have any encouragement for other public servants, that would be a good idea too. Okay. These folks are well known by most of you, but not all. Let me just give you a little background. And I've just met some of them myself this morning as well, so they don't know what I'm going to say. Assemblymember Autumn Burke is an impressive public servant. I encourage you to read her bio. She began her first term in the Assembly in 2014, following a career in real estate, and she seems to have public service in her blood. I learned that she appears to be following in the footsteps of another groundbreaking legislative leader who was the first woman in Congress to give birth while in office. Her mother. Congresswoman Yvonne Braithwaite Burke was the first black congresswoman from the West Coast, and we're certainly glad to have you and the benefits of her efforts today. And you're here on Election Day.
I am.
Thank you. I can't believe it. Anybody here from the 62nd District? No one?
Where?
Okay, we have some. Good.
Where? Okay, well.
All right,
Go
good.
vote. Go vote.
All right. So you're always speaking to voters.
Okay.
All right.
I voted, by the way, already. Hopefully you did too.
Commissioner Guzman-Aceves, also in the middle here, is one of these extraordinary rising stars that Governor Brown has picked and put into his administration. I believe she started as legislative secretary in his office. But for the past 2 years, she's been a member of the Public Utilities Commission. And although that's an important job, we don't want to belittle that job. I just have a feeling that there's more in her future than what she's accomplished so far. Commissioner Hochschild there on the end became a commissioner at the Energy Commission following my tenure about 5 years ago. And he's been deeply involved in renewables, addressing climate change, science-based energy policy, much longer than that. You can see the list of awards. I was going to read them again, but I just thought, no, they're there. I don't need to read those. They're just impressive. And I love my former commission, and I'm sure, and I know Commissioner Hochschild does as well, and that it's in good hands. It's a wonderful place. In fact, I had the great pleasure of going out to dinner with my former staff last night, which was a lot of fun. Let's see. The Board of Governors member, Mark Farron, has been charged by the governor with the operational control and authority over California's transmission grid. Prior to that, he served on the PUC. So besides having this really broad perspective of energy policy at the state level, he also brings a strong international financial experience. And I've observed, no longer commissioner, board member Farron, you bring a sense of practical...
Actually, technically, my title is governor.
Governor. Do you use that in Sacramento also?
Actually, our chief executive, Steve Berberich, calls all of us governor, and we all answer at the same time. It's kind of comic.
All right. Well, Governor Farron, he brings a sense of practicality and integrity that pervades all of his decision-making, and we're glad to have him. And finally, Don Weiss. Don is the CEO and co-founding director of the Marin Clean Energy, CCA, the first, as you all know, and my hero. It's incredible when you take on a role as a CEO and you're successful at it, but it's a completely different matter when you take on something that's never been done before. You have to figure out the path, how to get there, and then you do a good job at it and provide that leadership for others. Don, congratulations. I think you've done an excellent job of navigating the uncharted waters of community choice aggregation and providing a model for everyone else who's going to follow. It was a tall task, and you continue to do it very well. So I'm very pleased to have you all here. Would you take a moment and we'll start at that end there, and just take a moment, introduce yourselves. Really, I think what the audience might be interested in knowing is why you're elected to be on the panel here today.
Well, thank you, Jeff, first of all, for that generous introduction / eulogy for all of us. And good to be here. I will say, I think some of the most innovative activity happening in the energy space in the whole country is happening in CCAs here in California. And the moment we're in politically is that California is essentially now a country. We're the 5th largest economy in the world, and we are pioneering industries and policy models that are spreading to other states and other nations. The modern solar industry was born here in California. The modern wind industry was born here in California. We're half of the electric vehicle market in the country. And if you ask, like, what is the long-term energy destiny for the state? To me, it is getting to 100% renewables ultimately, and the electrification of almost everything. And the role that CCAs are playing in that vision is absolutely critical. And I'm happy to be here and get deeper into the issues today.
Glad you could make it. Governor Farron was
There
glad
you
you
go.
could make it.
There you go. Well, thank you very much for that introduction, and I'd like to thank Ann and Barry for their invitation to have me come here today. The Cal ISO has the awesome responsibility for maintaining the reliability of the grid as we move to a low-carbon environment. And CCAs are a vitally important part of that. We recognize that the future of the grid is going to revolve around what I like to call the 5 Ds. And I have to have a list because otherwise I'll forget them. The five Ds are decarbonization, distributed generation, diversification, digitization, and democratic access. So these are the core of where we think the modern grid will need to be, and I think CCAs are right in the bullseye for that. At the Cal ISO, we have dedicated significant resources to helping CCAs get launched and get started. I understand that a number of you went to visit the control room in Folsom yesterday. Those of you who have not been there, I encourage you to go have a look and see, I guess, have a little peek behind the curtain about what it takes to manage a grid that is rapidly evolving into a low-carbon future. So I'm very happy to be here and to see a number of my friends again here, and I welcome you to engage with the Cal ISO.
Thank you, Governor. Commissioner Guzman-Cebes.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Good morning. Well, one of the things I think the PUC is really focused on is the transition. And many of those issues have to deal with cost sharing between bundled and unbundled customers, but also what the future looks like and what the role of CCAs are within that future. I think the probable reason that I was asked, maybe some of the other commissioners were not able to attend, might be the first reason. But other than that, I do have a pretty equity-filled portfolio. We do have one proceeding dealing with fuel switching. It's actually from propane to hopefully options that are cleaner. And so one thing that I do want to get at today is how we look at the future when things in your own local regions, you're being very democratic and certainly responsive to your communities. We have had this obligation at the PUC to look at the state benefit and the state concerns and the state rules. And the legislature has put a lot of mandates on the IOUs to try to get at that. So I do want to share a couple of not so common scenarios. We've heard a lot about RA and the issues with overprocurement there and high costs there, but there's even more nuanced ones dealing with equity. So I want to share some of the, transition hurdles and shared vision that we perhaps can have in the future to try to ensure that we're not just thinking about ourselves, but we're thinking about everybody in the state, and I don't think they're mutually exclusive. Yeah.
Excellent. Assembly member.
So I actually just recently have one of the cities in my district just became part of a CCA. So for me, it's an equity conversation. For those of you who know my district, and I think most of those hands weren't for me, I just think there was one who knew who I was here. So I'll tell you a little about my district. I have the 62nd Assembly District, which on the west side is a coastal community. It's Venice, Marina del Rey, El Segundo. It's $900 a square foot. And then I have an eastern portion of my district, which includes Inglewood, Hawthorne, Gardena, and West Athens, which was named 5 or 6 years ago now one of the most challenged areas in the state of California. And so when we work in my office, we look at parity. We always want to make sure what the western portion of my district has, the eastern portion of my district will have access to at some point as well. And so when we look at things like CCAs to start to see that there are some of my eastern portion of my districts getting ready to, are starting to participate in some of these options, I think the one word that everyone has used here is the future. And I think you are part of the future. However, I want to make sure my whole community is part of that future. And so that's why I think usually when we have an opportunity like this, I like to come to just remind you that we don't want just our western portion of our community to participate, but we want to keep in mind the eastern portion of our district that appreciates local control and appreciates cheaper prices, but may not be able to come and may not be able to learn everything about what you do, but do count on your reliability. So that's why I'm here, is just to kind of be a little bit of a reminder of those who maybe haven't had an opportunity to participate in some of your systems, but hopefully will be in the future.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you. Ms. Weiss.
Yeah, and I want to say a little bit about why I'm here, going back even before the launch of MCE. I used to live in Los Angeles back in the 90s, the late 80s and 90s, and was an environmental justice organizer, working with Mothers of East LA, Concerned Citizens of South Central, and was very inspired down there by folks working 2 and 3 jobs and then organizing in their, their small hours of free time in the evenings and weekends to try and make sure that their communities had clean air to breathe. Coming up here and having the opportunity to launch a community choice program for me was a way to create big change through a mechanism that the legislature invented that allowed us to switch where power supply is coming from in our communities. And I think that what's been really rewarding for me about getting to be part of this movement is the impact that we're making directly on our communities. I was really inspired by what Jeff had to say this morning about what they've done in Sonoma County in their community. But every single community that's represented here has an inspiring story to tell, or many inspiring stories to tell. And coming to these events on a yearly basis, I just love the opportunity for cross-pollination, to learn from each other, to take best practices and share best practices. I think local governments are amazing at sharing what we do, being transparent in our communities, and being accountable to our communities. And so that's why I'm here today.
Wonderful. Thank you all very much. I want to try and cover as many topics as we can, so we got to get this ball rolling a little quicker than I've done so far. I want to talk about the status of the community choice aggregation in California today, the risks and benefits for customers, the issues that you've discussed here today around some of the expectations and maybe unmet policy needs. Let's get started. Ms. Weiss, you and some other very far-sighted folks got this all started. Give us a sense of where you see CCA today. Too many C's in there. Where are we today with community choice aggregation? What have CCAs accomplished to date? And if you can't remember all of them, we'll give you time later on to add others.
Okay. Well, the CCA movement has grown so quickly, particularly in the last few years. So there are currently 17 community choice programs serving load in California. And they've all been formed for a wide range of reasons. I think one thing that they all have in common is transparency in their decision-making and community engagement. But the different elements that are incorporated into each CCA are based on what the community is asking for. A lot of the focus has been around decarbonization, getting to a power supply that's more renewable and lower carbon, in many cases zero carbon, and providing that in an affordable way to customers. Most CCAs are able to provide power at rates that are stable, affordable, and often lower cost than the other alternative. We've also, and customers can choose. And just a quick side note on that, when we launched service in Richmond, which is a very low income community with high unemployment and a lot of job training programs, hungry for green collar job training and that sort of thing, we saw the highest uptick in our deep green option, which is a 100% renewable option. Wow. Higher than we'd seen in any community in Marin County. And that's because what we found and what we heard from the people in Richmond was that they couldn't afford to put solar on their rooftop. That's an option for wealthier customers, wealthier communities. But they could afford to pay 1 cent more per kilowatt hour, and it was important enough to them that they were choosing that option in droves. And that's how, we were able to be responsive in our communities. Other CCAs have focused on electric vehicle charging programs, getting infrastructure out there to shift load to the middle of the day when we have more solar in our portfolios. And we've been able to do, many communities have been able to do workforce development. I think that the project that has meant the most to me in the MCE territory is our MCE Solar One project, which is a 10.5 megawatt solar facility built on a brownfield site in Richmond, actually, that required 50% local hire in Richmond. And as a result, we had to work really hard. We spent 2 years training folks up to work on that project because I didn't want to see the same thing happened there that I saw happen in LA many times, where there was a promise of jobs by an industry coming into a low-income community, and then when the business showed up, they said, oh, none of you are qualified for the job. So the MCE Solar One project spent 2 years training folks, and we were able to provide jobs for over 340 customers, or 340 workers in the Richmond community, many of whom are our customers. So there are many examples of things that CCAs have accomplished so far, but I think it's only the beginning. I think that there's so much more that CCAs are going to accomplish in the coming years towards decarbonization. And the overarching theme, no matter how much diversity we see of programmatic elements, the overarching theme is going to be accountability and transparency and local engagement.
Thank you. Assemblymember Burke, let me ask you, your concern for the environment and the effect that it has on the people of California is prominent in all of your work. You're on the Assembly Utility and Commerce Committee. You've sponsored the legislation to extend the cap and trade program. Give us a sense, how do you see the benefits of community choice aggregation, and what are some of your concerns or the risks that you see?
Yeah. So the benefits, again, in the one city that we have, we're not seeing the same level of deep green, but we're seeing that people in my community, lower income areas, do want to participate in making the environment a better place. I think one of the greatest things that you all provide is the opportunity to have lower costs. There are people in my district who may have 6 holes for light bulbs, but put 1 in because they can't afford it, because they can't afford their energy costs. And so for us, I always tell this story. I became an environmentalist at McDonald's, which is the weirdest thing ever. When I was little, McDonald's used to, at Christmas, with your little Happy Meal thing, you used to get a Christmas tree in a little plastic container. And I would go get my Christmas tree and inevitably kill it. But I loved that little Christmas tree. And so suffice it to say that low-income communities want to find a way to participate. Solar is not an option for a lot of my folks. But to be able to participate and get lower costs is one of the great things, and that they get to actually choose and work with you has clearly been my city council's one of the things they're most proud of. The challenges are that same community, I think, doesn't have really an education and they don't have the time to learn a ton about what you do. They need to know that light turns on. They need to know that the refrigerator is going to be working when they get home, because they can't afford for that food to spoil. So I think that is one of the great concerns my community looks at as we review the options of a CCA. And like I said, we just only have one city in our district that has taken it on. I will also say this, though, as someone who worked on cap and trade and someone who does spend a lot of time with IOUs, I do also believe that one of the great mistakes that we make in the state is that we avoid the future and we avoid evolution. And the one thing I have learned is if we avoid it, it runs over us like a steam truck. And I think that you all, just looking at how many people are in this room, that if we as a body do not make sure that we ensure a successful path for you to work with IOUs or for you to have a future, that clearly you will steamroll over us. And we don't want that. I think the great thing about being a younger member in the legislature is the fact that it's in our vision, a 2.0 generation, where there's shared knowledge but shared opportunity. And also to look at how IOUs evolve and how you evolve and how we all work together in that evolution. Listen, Martha just said to me right when we sat down, she's like, "Did you call me a month ago?" And I said, "Yes, but I couldn't invite you to where we were going, so I didn't call you back." But we all are in this together, and I'm a huge believer in that, and that's how we worked on cap and trade. That's as we're working on wildfire issues and inverse and all these conversations that you all will be very much a part of, that, because those things will affect your structure, your lines and things like that. It's really important to the group I work with in the legislature, and I think the legislature as a whole, is that we work with stakeholders and we make sure that as we evolve together. Because like I said, I think in the past, the legislature has not been willing to evolve. And I think that we do understand now it's time.
That's an excellent point. I recall the Energy Commission 10 or 12 years ago, we didn't anticipate the large number of renewable projects that would be coming before us. It hit us like that freight train you were talking about. And we had to adjust. Yeah. We had to prepare for it. Commissioner Guzman-Aceves, let's back up just a second here. A lot of people, think community choice aggregation is the only issue before the PUC. And I don't think we really appreciate or understand the breadth of everything that you do. We can't imagine that there's anything more important than this issue. But I just wanted to ask you, I mean, the PUC, you're involved in so many things, and I was just trying to rattle off some of my own head here. From property loss from forest fires to general rate cases, environmental justice issues, pipeline safety, new legislative initiatives or mandates, GHG reduction, RPS, so many issues that you have to deal with, regulating so many different entities. What's the couple of things that keep you up at night that you're most preoccupied with right now, and kind of give community choice aggregation some perspective for our audience, if you wouldn't mind?
Well, I would say there's a few things. Assemblywoman Burke mentioned one, which is our climate changing. Not just fires, but also our hydro systems and our, some of you actually are highly dependent on hydro to keep your portfolios green. That's a change. I think we are not as able to adapt in our rulemaking as you are locally to those changes, so that is something I think is a great opportunity, but climate change is definitely happening at a pace that we're not really planning for as well as we could. And I think this past year actually was a huge reminder of that and how we need to really all get together and figure out a solution that works for the entire state and each of your local communities. I think our transition on our dependency on fossil fuels is a big thing as well. We have a huge reliability issue in Southern California with the Aliso Canyon, and it is not a black or white issue. It is an issue that is a factor in our basic economic viability, but it's also one of the largest, our gas use in general is one of the largest methane contributors in the state. Of course, not in comparison to our dairy consumption. But anyway, those are, our gas infrastructure is old. We need to really decide, is it time to reinvest in some of these really core infrastructure components of our transmission, our distribution of gas, or do we make that huge leap? And again, some of it, as the electricity system, some of it you can't just finance on your own. It is a great story that Jeff shared about Sonoma, but we still have the large infrastructure pieces of gas, so we kind of all need to be in that game together or it doesn't happen. I hope that makes sense. I also just wanted to share a little bit about the rest of the energy portfolio because I think sometimes we forget about, we're kind of in discussion about a not small, but anywhere between 35 and 40%, depending on the utility and time of year, of a bill, and you guys all know this well, is from generation. And we have so much more of that bill that we deal with on a daily basis that we do need to engage with and work cooperatively on because there are a lot more efficiencies to be gained on the rest of that bill. I really do agree with another statement Jeff made earlier, which is to say, it's not competition. You guys are not cheaper and you're not greener. I'm sorry to tell you that. It's really not. The legislature mandated the utilities to be green, and they are excelling. And fortunately they are. They've transformed a lot of our economy. They did the early investments in expensive renewables, and we as a society are grateful for that. But we also are transitioning from these really huge costs. Nuclear energy is another big one. We just did a transition, and just to highlight a couple of these pieces of policy that we don't really think about because we just think about generation procurement. But also, you know, we had a $300 million decision to transition Diablo. Workforce issues, really making sure there was correct severance and retraining of that workforce. It was an expensive decision. And that all fell on the bundled customers. And I don't agree with that. I think there should have been a shared cost because we all benefited from Diablo. Of course, if you're on the PG&E system. And even on some of the CAISO system it played into. So theoretically, we did all benefit. Anyway, I'm just saying that there is a lot of room for us to work together, and we shouldn't focus on cheaper generation costs or greener generation costs. That was a decade ago. That was the argument to be made a decade ago before the legislature mandated that the utilities become greener. The cost differential is just not there. So the local opportunities, you know, absolutely, you guys are more adaptable and fungible. Your connection to transportation is absolutely where we should be maximizing all the different regional planning efforts. But I do want to challenge the fact that, you know, those two kind of selling points are actually inaccurate in a lot of cases and are a bit antiquated.
I do want to say something really quickly, just as a legislator, because we are working on legislation to look at the IOU's ability to renegotiate some of their long-term contracts, in which case I do want to say what Jeff said and what Martha said is actually very poignant, is that there will be an opportunity for them to provide less expensive energy. And so I want to reiterate that your commitment to the communities, your full engagement with them, and whether that is transportation or in any other way, that will become will make you be sustainable. I mean, and no pun on the term, but it will be what makes you thrive and makes you different.
Ladies, thank you. Thank you for that perspective, Commissioner. Let's hear from the boys. Governor Farron, what's your take on CCA? Benefits, risks. Give us an idea of what your take is as the controller of the grid.
I think I agree with what David said earlier. I think CCAs are probably the most innovative and exciting development probably anywhere in the world, certainly in the United States. We're seeing really some amazing efforts marrying together emerging technology and local engagement. I think that's a formula for success. But there are risks there, and I love the way my friend Jeff laid it out as a challenge. We need to move beyond thinking about 100% renewable energy as the end goal. In fact, recently, the head of energy at Google, when Google announced that they had gotten to 100% procurement for their load, he said, that's a great milestone, 100%, but that's not the end point. The end point has to be to have a grid which is able to provide zero carbon electricity in all hours of the day and do that reliably. And that is a real challenge for the system. No offense to my friends in the solar industry, but we can't, with current technology, run this grid on 100% sunshine. We need to have other resources. We need to have adequate resources across the system. We need local resources. We need ramping capability. We need a number of attributes in aggregate. And it's essential that everybody who participates pays their fair share for that. So this is I think, going to be one of the challenges. I don't want to get into PCIA and the whole issue about legacy costs, which are incredibly fraught. But going forward, we need to think about how do we ensure that we have adequate resources across the whole grid in a world where increasingly the investor-owned utilities are stepping back and becoming wires-only companies and are not necessarily best placed to be responsible for that. And at the same time, some of the smaller community choice aggregators may not have the sufficient scale to acquire these resources economically. So we need to think about the whole issue of how to establish a process whereby those resources are identified, that they're paid for, and that cost is shared fairly amongst all the participants.
And I hope we'll have a little bit of time to get into some of these equity issues. But Mr. Hochschild, rightly or wrongly, I always used to say that I thought the California Energy Commission's job was to look out for California's energy future. They had the best informed people to do that. And I also used to say that the Energy Commission never met a megawatt it didn't like. But things have changed. I mean, just to cite a couple of quick examples to give you a sense of where I'm going with this, your commission recently turned down a power plant licensing permit and said, hey, look at some alternatives. Oakland shutting down a peaking unit, and instead of building a new transmission line, there's a partnership going on with PG&E and the local community to do energy efficiency and local renewables.
Yeah.
The PUC approved an expedited approval of 100 megawatts of energy storage to address the Aliso Canyon issue. And it was on in less than 6 months. Is this the future?
Yeah,
Solar
look,
and renewables?
The Energy Commission has changed and the state has changed. And just to locate this conversation we're having today in light of recent developments. So just a few weeks ago, we voted at the Energy Commission to mandate solar on every new home in California.
I know you're very proud of it.
And this is something that's the first state in the country to do that. It will reduce energy bills for California homeowners by 53% from our last code cycle 3 years ago, okay? And this is the kind of thing I am absolutely, we're the first state to do that. I'm absolutely confident we're not the last. And we have to keep pushing the envelope on things like that. In January, we banned the incandescent light bulb, helping transition to high color addition LEDs. And California, because our market is so big, when we take these actions, it has effects far beyond our borders. But let me just ask a question here. Raise your hand in the audience if you own an iPhone. Okay, so look around. That's like 80% of the audience. Okay, the iPhone didn't exist until 10 years ago. Last year, Apple manufactured the 1 billionth iPhone. Okay, it is possible. We're in an era now where new technologies can be introduced and can spread rapidly. And on energy, which has traditionally been a pretty static industry, it doesn't change. We have that mindset hasn't quite caught hold yet, but that's how we need to be thinking about it. I know many of you have seen this photo, these two photos of 1900 Fifth Avenue, New York City, this street filled with horses and buggies and one car in a traffic jam. And then 13 years later, same street filled entirely with cars and one horse and buggy, right? And like that's how we need to think about the transition, for example, to electric vehicles and to renewables. And it is actually happening. 10 years ago, we only had 10% renewables in the state of California. Today, we're at 30%. We don't include large hydro in our legal definition of renewables. You add that, we're at 40% today. The transition is already well underway. The pieces that I think are most important right now to focus on as we get to this all renewables future with the electrification of almost everything. Right now, I think a couple things I want to just run through quickly. One is electric heat pumps. If you go inside your house, the natural gas water heater is 50% of our gas consumption. And today, electric heat pumps are ripe. They are much more cost effective. You reduce your monthly bills when you transition. You see some very bold programs, including what SMUD just started a few weeks ago, offering a $3,000 incentive to transition to electric heat pumps. I just did that myself in our home in the Bay Area, and they're actually offering even a $10,000 rebate to electrify the entire home.
Commissioner, I'm going to take a little
jump in.
How does this apply to CCA? What can CCA do to help make this future
Sonoma is
happen?
doing it, and I think Jeff deserves great credit, along with many of your colleagues, on pushing these kind of things. And I think my point is that when you see incentives for electric vehicles or heat pumps, that is actually helping to incubate a new market that can grow statewide and then beyond our states. And I just want to, we cannot underestimate the power of those early incentive programs. If you look at the solar industry as an example, right, which started out local communities, San Francisco and others do, and by the way, before we did the solar mandate on new homes, 7 cities adopted a solar mandate, right, that you incubated there. Well, this year we're going to hit 1 million solar roofs in California, right, and we have over 100,000 people in the solar industry in the state. And so the ability to incubate, and when nothing big ever started big, it all starts small. And so let me just close with two thoughts for particularly the new folks who are getting into this field about, I think, the human qualities that you need to have to be successful. And the number one quality, I think, is actually being relentless. I mean, this challenge we face of climate change is colossal. It is the challenge of our generation, and you need to just get in that mindset. It's not going to be easy. Actually, we need to get excited about how tough this challenge is and fix ourselves to that. And then secondly, just always endeavor to speak with one clear, loud voice. And the bigger your coalition is, the better position you are to be successful. And every single renewable energy, clean energy, electric vehicle policy victory that we've ever had has been because they had a broad coalition that was relentless and diverse and kept at it until you got it done. And I'd close with that.
So this is great. We're not moving fast enough. We got a lot of issues we want to try and talk about. Let's turn it up a little bit here. Commissioner, thank you very much. We've heard some of the benefits, some of the risks, and your concerns. I'm still having trouble understanding what's not to like about community choice energy. It's moving the needle faster, despite what Commissioner Guzman-Aceves said. These communities are pushing higher levels of renewables, lower levels of GHG. Their costs are lower. What's not to like about community choice energy? Commissioner Guzman-Aceves, the president of the PUC, who we had the benefit of having on this panel last year, he's raised some alarm bells. Quote, if California policymakers are not careful, we could drift slowly back into another predicament like the energy crisis of 2001. He's making the comparison that we may be facing an electricity crisis because we do not have a plan to deal with CCAs. So do you share his concern? What's going on here? Why raise the alarm bells around what seems to be a very good thing?
Okay, well, I also say in President Baker's defense, when Oroville...
No, you should never defend another commissioner. Never.
When Oroville was breaking, I live in Natomas, he gave me the 3 scenarios of the 3 levees that, if they broke, would flood my house. And that's just right here. I mean, I live right here. So he does think about worst case scenarios. And yes, theoretically, there would be a lot of things that would have to fail for this to be anywhere near an energy crisis. But we just had some experiences where my biggest concern is that we're not procuring smartly, and our friends over at the ISO are doing a lot of reliability must run contracts, a lot more than before, and we're spending more money where we shouldn't do that. We should be doing a coordinated, centralized planning, unfortunately is still needed in this state, for a very disaggregated and decentralized system that we are headed to. There's no, by the way, also, you know, our administration, there were, the majority of the commissioners were very supportive of the Migden bill and fighting for that to happen. So we are your friends. We're not the enemy. We actually do believe in this, but I want to just use my time to be very frank with you, which is don't be against coordinated planning. We still need it. It will save your customers. It will save everybody's customers for those areas that we still cannot rely upon the sun for and we don't have storage for. That's just one example. The RA problem is one that can theoretically lead to reliability issues, so he is correct in that sense. Now we're actually kind of doing the opposite problem, which is it's a very fluctuant area, and it's one that I absolutely think we should all be on board, and we currently have a proposed decision that Commissioner Randolph has led that I think offers a good path forward on that, because it is a reliability issue. But my bigger concern with the RA that we've been seeing is that we're paying too much for it, and it's really dirty. So let's get together, let's plan, let's do some cooperative purchasing that could be cleaner and more reliable. That's one example. So I do, sometimes, you know, we do have to ring the alarm to really get everybody to play nice with each other, unfortunately, and I think that was the goal there. But I do see some of these items that we really can be more coordinated on, and it's from my perspective, it's a win-win. Instead of the generators having the advantage, the customers will have the advantage because the providers, all LSEs, will have a cooperative way to do this purchasing. So
this is great. Thank you very much for that response. It plays into the next question I'd like to ask, and I think I'm going to go to Ms. Weiss on this. We have now the Green Book. Everybody familiar with the Green Book? Not too many of you. Okay, well, we don't have much time to familiarize you with it, but it's a PUC document that's come out recently in the last month that describes a plan for how to address these issues that you've been discussing. And so we're going to have to kind of leave it at that. But I think it does raise, well, I remember the blue book. How many of you remember the blue book? Yes, and the yellow book. Okay, these preceded, for those younger members of the panel today, preceded the energy crisis in 2001. Let me turn to Ms. Weiss. It raises the question here, is the PUC forgetting job one, and that is to regulate monopolies and control costs? Are they getting a little out of their lane here if they're concerned about things like reliability? Isn't that the ISO's job if they're concerned about energy future? I think that's the Energy Commission's job. And maybe there's a role here for the legislature. Ms. Weiss, would you like to say anything about this issue or not?
Yeah, I think that the draft white paper that's being referred to as the Green Book.
That's right, it was a white paper first.
Yeah. It seems it has not clearly identified a problem and also hasn't clearly identified a solution. And what I think would be helpful coming out of the CPUC is a document that talks about what should, or at least includes, what should the new role of the CPUC be in light of the changes in the market. That wasn't contemplated in this paper. The paper seems to be pointing at potential concerns that aren't really well grounded. But nonetheless, I think it's a useful conversation to be having. And I want to respond to a comment you made about coordinated planning. I don't think anyone here in the room, no one that I've talked to about it doesn't want to have coordinated planning. I think we are all Californians. We are all in this together. We all want to see a future that has a lower carbon future, a reliable grid, and we're in it together and we're partners. I think that the draft white paper, unfortunately, is maybe making the CCAs a bit of a scapegoat for what the state has been doing over the last 10 years, which is decarbonizing. And that's a conscious transition that we've all been making together as a state. And it has some bumps. The reliability must-run contracts that you referenced, yeah, we're seeing more of those. That probably has a lot to do with the transition that we're all in together to decarbonize. Not so much that we have different and new players in the market. So I think that needs to be part of the thinking of the CPUC on this. I think that the role that the CCAs have played in contributing to that is, I think that we have accelerated the process of decarbonization. I agree that the state mandates, the rules that are in place have us on that path already, but as CCA load departs from the IOUs, they're holding on to their green resources and they're becoming greener a lot more quickly than they might have been able to otherwise. And that's a good thing. But it is causing the transition to happen, I think, a little faster than we all talked about. The last thing that I think is important that relates to all of this is fair cost allocation. I think another maybe misunderstanding is that around how CCAs feel about cost allocation. I can't speak for everyone here, but the folks I've talked to about cost allocation agree that everyone should pay their fair share of contracts that were entered into before CCAs existed. But the real question is, what is that fair share? And the best way to achieve equity in any way, including cost allocation, is transparency. And I think that's what's been missing. And I think the wonderful gift that local governments bring to this conversation is our grounding in transparency. And that's what we've been pushing for when we talk about cost allocation. And we're finding some really exciting, innovative ways to bring down costs for all customers, bundled customers and unbundled customers, because we are local governments trying to benefit all of our constituents, and because we believe in equity and transparency. So I think a lot of good can come out of that, and I hope that our conversation going forward can become a positive conversation and a collaborative conversation.
where do you want to go from there? You want to talk about reliability? Do you believe the equity issue that she's raised is correct? Anyone want to respond? Okay.
I mean, I do want to
Please.
respond, but I don't want to be defensive.
Go right ahead, Commissioner.
I mean, fortunately, we agree on the future, and that's, you know, the legislature has very clear mandates on all LSCs, so we're all going to be greener together. I do think that there is no black or white here. We do have to work collaboratively. You have had a lot of really interesting proposals for saving across the board, like some of your refinancing proposals. I think those are very interesting. By the way, as a tangent to that, I do want to say, there are other things that are still institutionally really good social policies that were largely derived from legislation. How many of you are familiar with our General Order 156?
Well,
Yeah, okay. Our General Order 156 came about by, more recently updated by Senator Bradford, and this is legislation dealing with diversity contracting. One of the big areas that we've been forcing is on financial services. That's why this reminded me of the refinancing option. Now, there are things like that where you will excel on local issues, and there are other things that we actually have thought about, and there's some merit to continuing. So I just give that as a little bit of an example of things that the utilities have done well because they've either been forced to or had some ingenuity on their own to do. The reliability issue is a state mandate. The PUC is responsible for ensuring reliability. If we want to have you know, I do agree with Dawn that there's been a variety of factors. Certainly, the growth of solar has increased that, but also the contracting itself. Before, the utilities used to have multi-year contracting for this RA, and now because of how the, you know, decentralization of procurement has occurred, it doesn't make sense for them anymore because one day they may go from one year to another and shed another 15% of their load. So this is just to say there's a lot of causes. There's nobody really to blame. There's a lot of factors that have come forward to it. But I think what we're calling for is a real need to come and work collaboratively to save all of our customers money. And I think that's, we can all agree on that.
And I will say this, to some of what you said, I think as a legislature, we do look at what the CPUC's role will be as we move forward, as you all grow, as our communities change, and as the way we procure energy, as the way we receive our energy, and whether we're in communities, obviously, that can sustain themselves. All of these things will contribute to what the CPUC becomes. However, I am a huge believer that we're all part of a whole. And whether that is energy or a person, the best analogy I can give is when we look at someone's health. Their health isn't just about what medicine they took or how what nutrition they ate. It's about whether they have a home. It's about whether whether if they've gone to the doctor and they have mental health issues. So when we look at a person, we look at a whole person now. And I think we will have to look at our grid and our communities as whole entities, and it will be an IOU and a CCA entity, and we will all be cells in that person. And if we do not work together, quite frankly, my feeling is if we don't find a way to work together, the legislature will just legislate on it and force y'all to work together. And
we know how well that works.
And listen, and we don't like doing, and well, some of us like doing it and some of us don't. I am always the first to be like, look, if I can facilitate y'all to do the right thing, great. If I can't, then I write a bill. That's how I usually look at it. And so, you know, when I look at these conversations, you know, it gives me a chance to see how are we going to work together and how committed are we to the concept that we are all a whole state and we will have to continue to work together. Cost allocation for us is a huge issue right now. And we spend a tremendous amount of time working on wildfires right now. And there are extreme costs that are coming with as our environment changes. We are facing extreme costs, and whether we look at new opportunities or not new opportunities, but whether we bring biomass and back into play and all these other things, because we have a whole state. We have a state with fuels that are sitting on acres of land that are could be a commodity for us. We have We have an environment that's changing where fires are going to be larger. We have contracts that should be less for some of the IOUs that are not because they sign long-term contracts. This is all part of the whole system. And my feeling very strongly is if you want to function in the state of California and you want to use the wires and poles that we have established, then you have to take part in that whole person, whole state process. And so I do want to say for that fact that that is tremendously important, and it is, like I said, without question, something if you don't do voluntarily, we will find a way to do for you.
So I didn't mean to be glib with my comment about the
No,
legislature, but I was referring to AB 1890 back in 1996 that gave us deregulation. And also, I was doing a little research. Are you familiar with AB 2145 a few years ago? Your predecessor, Assemblymember Bradford, gave us that bill. You may recall that was the opt-in, opt-out bill, which I think kind of galvanized this community. So everybody said there must be something there, and sure enough, it turns out there is. So that's what I meant by my comment. It's unintended consequences of legislation.
And listen, like I said, we don't like, or there are those of us who don't like to do it, but we have found that sometimes that even just forcing even putting a bill in or forces you all to the table, forces you out of this room and into the building across the street where we can have a conversation on how we push everything into the right direction.
So thank you. Let me go to Governor Farron. What do you want to say anything about the Green Book and its plan for addressing reliability? I want to provoke you a little bit. That's your realm. What is the PUC doing here?
Okay. Well, I notice we have 10 minutes left, so I won't answer at length. So I'll just say quickly, I think it's absolutely right on that we look at these issues. So the way of calling attention to it, which is to harken back to the energy crisis, is always, I think, a bit extreme, but sometimes drama is required. But I think it is right that we look at what kind of model are we evolving to. I think it's actually, in a sense, community choice energy is not deregulation. It's not Texas-style, open market. We need to worry about slamming and cramming and that sort of thing. So that's what it's not. But there are some genuine issues around reliability that we need to be concerned about. For example, this summer, the Cal ISO has done an analysis, and we have a better than 50% chance of having a level 2 emergency in Southern California.
Level 2 is bad, right?
Level 2 is bad. Level 2 means that we are within the striking 5%. Distance of within between 3 and 6% of reserves. So we will be having we are predicting that with there's a good chance that we will need to have flex alerts and need to be shedding load and calling on demand response and so on. So this is directly the result of problems with Aliso Canyon and the low hydro season where we're at 50% of normal levels and so on. So this is real stuff. And I recall when I was appointed to the PUC by Governor Brown, as he's signing my letter, he turns to me and says, "Whatever you do, don't screw it up." And we're, this is.
He says that to all the commissioners.
I'm sure that's probably his exit. That's his pep talk as you're going out there. Don't screw it up. But I mean, this is reliability is really job one. So I feel that procurement is 100% the responsibility of the state agencies that are charged for doing that. Right? That is not the responsibility. Oops, I killed it. Not the responsibility of the ISO. We don't like it when we have to grant reliability must-run contracts in the sense that, to me, that indicates that there's been a failure upstream in the process. Mm-hmm. That, and we do face a very serious transition problem here. That we have, I would say, many dozens, if not hundreds, of power plants across the state that are going to become redundant over time as we replace dirty fuels with clean fuels. And we need to have a process where some of these plants are going to be needed for a long period of time, but cannot exist on their current diet of meager earnings. Right. And so we do need to have a plan around how to ensure that the plants that we require for reliability and have the attributes that we need will continue to perform. And it's not good policy to leave it to the grid operator to do it at the 11th hour.
Let me just add to that real quickly, one point I thought you were going to make but didn't, which is about regionalization. Because just as we need to work better together within the state, we also need to work with our surrounding region. And to me, that's absolutely essential for our long-term energy success. There's surplus renewables in other states, and when we have surplus of renewables we can export, we will be much more efficient as a region. And it's also, by the way, the best way to shut down coal in places like Utah and Nevada is make them compete against zero marginal cost renewables. And so that has got to happen. There's a political lift there that's difficult, but to me, that's an essential piece of the puzzle.
I agree with you. There are dozens of reasons why regionalization must happen if we're going to move to deep decarbonization. There are many technical reasons, technology reasons, economic reasons. The politics, though, is the stumbling block. And I think, I ask all of you out there, you're intelligent human beings, do your own research, right? Look at this problem carefully, and I think you will come to the same conclusion as I, that having a broadly diversified regional grid is going to make deep decarbonization and maintaining reliability, that's really the best and cheapest path forward. There are lots of concerns that somehow the ISO loves transmission lines and loves coal. Total bollocks, right? So I urge you all to look very carefully at the arguments that are being presented to you. I know folks are handing out flyers on things. A lot of that is really not worth the paper it's printed on.
So I apologize to all of you in my audience, but the clock has ticked away. So we're really down to the last 5 minutes. Oh, less. Not by my watch. So Barry, I'm going to take a little bit of license here to make sure that we get a chance for closing remarks. But Commissioner Guzman Aceves, there's been a number of questions that have come in around this issue, and I think you're going to get asked this later on anyhow. So please address it for us now if you wouldn't mind. And this will be the last question, then I'll ask each of you to go through and give us your short closing remarks. Please explain why you stated that CCAs don't provide cleaner, cheaper power compared with the California's IOUs.
Sure. I think there's variation right now, but my point is we all have the same mandate. Everyone, because of SB 350, has to be 50% by 2030. We're all going to be greener together. So in the end, and even beyond that, you will not be greener. And in many cases, you're not. And by the way, I was a little disappointed in your integrated resource planning comments and asking for more RECs to count. That's a very good reflection of how you're meeting your 100% right now. So I'm just calling you out and to be real about the fact that we all the utilities, all of the CCAs, all the munis, everyone has the same mandate. And the greener argument is really not the future argument. Maybe some of you are at 20% today or 23%, but I think what was SE's peak on they were at 78%. I mean, it's really not the leading argument. So I just want us to be real about the fact that we all have the same mandate, we all have to be green. Our responsibility is to review the integrated resource plans to make sure you're going to meet those goals, but that's really it. It's quite simple. It's kind of like, let's not really fight about that. We all have the same mandate. Let's figure out how we can procure those resources in the most smart and efficient way. And some of them will have local benefits, but some of them will make sense to procure jointly in one form or another.
Thank you all very much. I apologize, but we're going to go ahead and close. We'll come down the line if you don't mind. Commissioner Hochschild, would you like to make some closing remarks?
Yeah, just very quickly. I think we can see and touch this clean energy future. We're that close. And you think about just the challenge of getting off the last remaining fossil capacity. We have the average peaker in California has a 10% capacity factor, right? So 90% of the time it's not being used. And the things that we can do on energy storage and electrification and regionalization, we can move beyond fossil fuels in our lifetime. That is doable, it's achievable, and if it's going to happen in the United States, it's going to happen through California, and CCAs are an absolutely essential laboratory and pioneer in that effort, and I really want to thank everyone here who's been on the front lines for a long time. Keep pushing, we're going to get it done.
Excellent. Governor Farron.
I'll just say, as a longtime customer of CCA, thank you very much, Dawn, and a supporter of the movement, I'm very, very excited by the future possibilities that you all represent here in the room. And I just want to reiterate that we at the California Independent System Operator, we stand ready to help you and to help you see a successful future.
Excellent. Commissioner.
Yeah, I would say that I agree that the innovation that can occur locally is by far much more expeditious than anything we could do at the state level. It is your strength. And in terms of decarbonizing our non-electricity use, our transportation, our heating, that's where you can lead more than anybody else. Those mandates don't exist at the statewide level. The mandates are really focused on electricity, and that's kind of already on a path. We're going to get there. We got to do more coordinated planning, but we're going to get there. I really encourage you to lead on the heating needs and on the transportation needs, and to not forget the responsibility you have to all of your customers, east and west, north and south, because there's going to be a continued need for some investment, not just in your community, but in your neighbors. And I'm not sure what that formula looks like now, so I really invite you to bring forward those ideas.
Excellent. Assemblymember-elect Burke.
I know, right? Thank God only one of you lives in my district right now. We're in this together, and that's never lost on me. And it's incredibly important to me that as this conversation moves forward, and as you all grow, which you clearly are, that we work together, and that means us as legislators with you. That is you continuing to work with our local communities. And I do want to thank you for your continued commitment to growing into disadvantaged communities, giving them the opportunity to have some of that local touch and that local opportunity and that you can provide that makes you so different from the IOUs. And I just encourage you to continue to be part of every community, no matter what their economic basis is.
Thank you. We're so glad to have you here today. Thank you. And finally, Ms. Weiss.
Yeah, just two quick clarifications and then I'll close. But I just wanted to clarify that the comments that were made about the reliability must-run contracts that were issued in the fall, just want to clarify that that wasn't due to any failure or default by a CCA. I just want to make sure that's clear for everyone because it often gets misinterpreted. I think that what we're seeing, though, is fewer fossil resources in the state. And that affects everyone. And it's going to affect CCAs, just like it affects everyone. Again, you know, we're all in that together. We're facing solar curtailment and the cost that goes with that. And I agreed with the comments about regionalization that would allow allow us not to face such huge expenses related to that curtailment. I also wanted to clarify on the comment about unbundled RECs that, you know, currently this year, the CCAs are serving 4.6 million accounts across the state. And if you combine the renewable, the RPS for all CCAs, we're at 35%, exceeding the state mandate. MCE is currently at 56%. And if you combine all the CCAs serving load, it's only 2% unbundled RECs. So that's another kind of misnomer that gets out there. I just want to clarify. But I think what this leads into, and kind of in the comments I wanted to leave folks with, is that consistency is important, and consistency in our rules in the state are important. There are current rules around unbundled RECs and the percentage that goes into the mix, and there are currently rules about and best practices around greenhouse gas accounting. We've all procured using those existing set of rules. And so I think some of the tension that we're feeling in the policymaking right now relates to maintaining consistency so that we can follow the rules that have been set in place and follow the best practices. So I just wanted to urge us all to continue to think about consistency and to avoid big changes that would not allow our local governing boards to know what objectives they need to be following. Because the current rules are working well, I would say, to make sure we have plenty of resources available and that we have plenty of renewables going onto the grid. And then my closing thought is just I wanted to express a lot of gratitude for the folks in the room that are doing such hard work to get these programs off the ground and make them successful and make them fit within the great rules that have been set up for us to work within, and also express gratitude for those of us, or those of you in decision-making roles that are helping to keep California on track to set a great model up for the rest of the country. Many thanks.
Please join me in thanking our panelists today.